When we talk about pregnancy, what we're talking about is that time after fertilization or conception where the zygote is going to be developing inside the uterus. In humans, that normally takes 3 trimesters, so 3 groups of 3 months, 3, 6, 9 months total, and it is going to be around 38 weeks, 38 to 40 weeks, starting at conception. Well, actually, it's called 38 weeks at conception because it is 40 weeks from the last period, right? Because we know that periods are normally 28 days, which is 2 weeks, which is 4 weeks. And we normally ovulate in the middle. So around 2 weeks from the last period is going to be conception, and then 38 weeks after that. That's where that 40 weeks comes from. That prenatal, meaning anything that's happening before birth, it's going to be divided into 2 main parts. The embryonic stage, which is when the offspring goes from zygote to embryo, and then when it actually becomes a fetus. That is going to happen around the 8th week. So out of those 38, right, the first 8 are going to be when it's an embryo, which is the zygote developing. And then once 8 week comes, then it's going to be, then it can be called a fetus because that's going to be the fetal stage. Let's first start talking about the embryonic stage. And this development of a fertilized egg into a fetus is mind-blowing. Take a look at this. Here we have at the beginning that fertilized egg, right? And you can see that it's going to have it's going to have that degrading zona pellucida, zona radiata. And the first thing that's going to happen is the first ever mitotic division of a newly fertilized egg. So an oocyte that met a sperm. And just as you know, during mitosis, you're going to duplicate all the genetic material and you're going to divide into 2 cells. And that's what this looks like. Okay? Then those 2 cells are going to keep dividing until you have what it's called a blastomere. And blastomeres are going to be just subdivisions of that fertilized egg. So as I mentioned, you are the first, once that egg is fertilized, is going to be called a zygote. Then it's going to start dividing, right? And when you have around 16 cells, that is going to be called a morula. Okay, so a morula is going to be an egg that has been fertilized, that divided enough that it has 16 cells, and it's still not attached to the wall. So again, it's fertilized in the fallopian tube. It starts dividing and moving towards the uterus, but at the morula stage is still not attached to the uterine wall. Then we're going to form what is called a blastocyst. And a blastocyst, it actually has cells, but it has an empty inside, and that is where the inner cell mass and the trophoblasts are going to form. So, and I have a picture so that you can see it in a second. That blastocyst is what's going to get attached to the wall of the uterus. Then, of course, the placenta is going to be formed, right? And you all heard that a placenta exists. But what is it? Well, it's going to be part of that trophoblast and the inside of the uterus, the endometrium. They, 2 of them are going to, cells from both of them are going to develop into a tissue that is going to be very important for keeping that zygote that then is going to become an embryo alive. Here's an example, right? Here we have, again, the ovaries. We have, this is the uterus, fallopian tube, infundibulum, fimbria. This egg is going to be fertilized somewhere in the infundibulum. One lucky sperm is going to fertilize it. And from there, it's going to start rolling into the uterus. And as it goes along, it's going to divide, right? The fertilized egg is going to be called a zygote. Then it's going to start doing its first mitotic division or cleavage division. Then you have 2 cells. Then from there you go to 4. From there you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 until you end up with all 16 of them, and that is going to be a morula. So the morula, as you can see, it still hasn't attached. Then it's going to keep growing and end up being, as I said, a sphere with a hollow inside. And from there, that is the blastocyst that is going to get implanted or attached to the wall of the uterus. And from there is where we're going to have that the inner cell mass is going to grow, and it's going to grow out of this right here. And also, this is very interesting. So these few cells that are going to be what are going to end up being that embryo and that fetus and a bunch of other things, right? That when we talk about stem cells and stem cell research, those are the cells that they're talking about. And why is it that they're so important for research, but also so controversial, right? They are very important and very useful because all of those stem cells can become anything. Meaning, remember, from those cells is that we're going to end up creating our fetus. So those cells can become nervous system, brain, nerves. They can become circulatory system. They can become hearts, arteries, veins. They can become digestive system. They can become bones. They can become skin. They can become anything in the human body. So you can imagine how important they are for research. But also they are controversial because at some point they were being harvested from either blastocysts that were never implanted, or even from unborn babies, or anything like that. So that's why they were very controversial. All right. This is another pretty cool picture. So the trophoblast is going to be that outside of that hollow ball of cells, right? And then inside where those stem cells are is where the inner cell mass is. And you can see that blastocyst that has the trophoblast and the inner cell mass attached to this, which is the uterine wall. This is the endometrium, which is the inside of the wall of the uterus. And from that inner cell mass is that we're going to keep, again, growing and developing until we are going to have a fetus. Okay, so this is still the embryonic stage. So it's still an embryo. This is how implantation looks. It's another picture that shows pretty much the same thing. Here you can see that blastocyst, right, with the trophoblast, and the inner cell mass is probably somewhere in here. And all of this is going to be the endometrium. This is the inside of the inside of the uterus. That implantation is actually going to happen somewhere within that first week after fertilization happened. Then what's going to happen is that this, remember, the trophoblast was all of this out here, and outside you're gonna form what is called the chorion. Remember, we're still inside the endometrium, so this is in the wall, and this is going to be that cell that's going to be dividing and growing, and it's going to divide into a lot of different things. The main regions are going to be this, which is called the amnion, which is what's going to end up wrapping around that fetus and form that zygote and form the amniotic chamber where you have the amniotic fluid inside of it. And then here we're going to have the different layers of tissue: endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. They're just everything that you need to form a little human later. As I mentioned, right, we're going to have a membrane called the amnion, which is going to develop into that area where you're going to have the amniotic fluid inside that amnion. And there's also going to be formed an umbilical cord, which is going to connect the embryo to the placenta. Because remember, we said the placenta is very important, and it's going to be giving all the nutrients that the baby needs, and it's also going to be important for the blood that's going to come to the baby, and all of that is going to go through the amniotic, through the umbilical cord. There you go, umbilical cord. Here again, you can see the development of those three very important membranes: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. The ectoderm is going to be important for forming the nervous tissue. The mesoderm is important for muscles, so including also the kidneys, but muscles and your regular striated muscles and your heart muscle, cardiac muscle. And then the endoderm is going to be important for all those internal organs that are going to be formed from development, and when that tissue is going to start differentiating into the different organs. Here you can see, again, remember all of this is endometrium, and here you have blood vessels from the mother that are going to become in here are going to later become the umbilical cord. And from here you can see how that fetus is going to start developing. That embryo right now, it's going to be developing. This is the amnion with the amniotic fluid inside of it. And what else? And all of these blood vessels right here are going to be what are going to become later the placenta. Okay. Some people confuse the amnion with the placenta, completely different things. I think I have better pictures of the placenta later on as well. Here you can see, right, all of this is going to become placenta. And here you can see from that, we're going to get blood vessels that are going to then be in the umbilical cord and reach the developing embryo. We actually have two umbilical arteries, one umbilical vein. We'll see that later. Here we can see. You can see the umbilical arteries right here, and this is the umbilical vein. Interesting that you can probably see already that the umbilical arteries are blue and the umbilical vein is red. It's important. You can imagine that the umbilical vein is going to be oxygenated, and the arteries are not oxygenated. Remember, the definition of an artery, right? It is something that is going away from the heart, and a vein is something going towards the heart. Important to see that. In this case, it's going to be a little bit different. We'll see that, but the definition stands.